Welcome to Between Crossroads with Kalen Allen, where we explore pivotal issues, topics, and ideologies at the intersection of diverse and sometimes conflicting identities. Today, we're tackling a topic that has captivated global attention for decades and continues to invoke strong emotions and debates: Israel and Palestine. Now, the roots of this conflict stretch back over a century, involving a long and painful history between Israelis and Palestinians, with key events including the formation of Israel in 1948, the Six-Day War in 1967, and numerous subsequent conflicts and peace efforts. This enduring conflict has led to significant loss of life and displacement, impacting generations. The situation remains highly volatile, with peace seeming elusive despite numerous attempts at resolutions. The Israel-Palestine conflict has been a contentious issue in news media, on social media platforms, and across various protests around the world. Coverage often varies dramatically, where media outlets and social networks sometimes show contrasting narratives that reflect broader political and cultural biases. This disparity in coverage has led to a polarized public opinion, marked by protests that both condemn and support various actions within the conflict. The discourse is further complicated by accusations of hypocrisy and conflicting principles, where the lines between anti-Semitism, criticism of Israeli policies, and the defense of Palestinian rights are hotly debated. Joining us today is Rabbi Alissa Wise, the founder and lead organizer of Rabbis for Ceasefire. Rabbi Wise has been at the forefront of advocating for peace and challenging the conflation of Jewish religious beliefs with political Zionism. Today, she's here to share her unique perspective at the crossroads of being Jewish and actively calling for a ceasefire and a reconsideration of the policies that continue to fuel this conflict. Our conversation aims to illuminate the nuances often overlooked in mainstream discussions about Israel and Palestine. We'll explore the historical context, the impact of international policies, and the powerful role that misinformation and misunderstanding play in perpetuating the conflict. Rabbi Wise will also address common misconceptions, share her personal experiences, including her recent arrest in Israel while attempting humanitarian efforts, and discuss the critical role of public opinion in shaping the narrative. So, let's dive into this complex discussion, aiming to provide a clearer understanding and perhaps a way forward towards peace. This is Between Crossroads. Well, thank you so much for being here. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling good. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Now, I want to first start out. So you are the founder of Rabbis for Ceasefire, correct? Mm-hmm. How did that all start?
It's a good question. So part of the backstory is my own backstory. Mm-hmm. I am a rabbi. I was ordained in 2009. And I have, in my rabbinic career, organized rabbis in New York City with a group called Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, and at my previous organization, Jewish Voice for Peace. And so after the attacks of October 7th and the weeks following, where it was really clear that the majority of the Jewish community was really circling the wagons around Israel, and I kind of took the Israeli leaders at face value when they started making statements about denying the people of Gaza food, fuel, water. Like, I understood, because I've been part of the movement for Palestinian rights for so long, that I understood to believe them when they said what they were gonna do. And so one morning I woke up and opened the news to whatever the new horror of the day was, and kind of understood that there's a role for rabbis to call in the Jewish community in this moment and to remind the Jewish community of our obligation to live up to the core value within Jewish tradition, which is that all people are made in the image of the divine. And that means all people, correct, right? And so if we are gonna actually live by that value, we need to call in Jews to the movement for ceasefire, right? Because the call for ceasefire is a call to save lives, right? Both Palestinian lives that are under attack by Israeli bombs and the Israeli lives of the hostages that are being held in Gaza, and a part of our call was very clearly to release the hostages. So I sent a message to a bunch of my rabbinic colleagues and was like, we need to like put out a message to the world and to the Jews to remind them that our tradition is a tradition of peace and a tradition of life. And so we put together in 48 hours a little video of rabbis making that call for ceasefire, and I had 80 rabbis in 48 hours sign on to it, which was actually a lot more than I expected, honestly, in that moment, because there was so much of like insularity in the Jewish community. We just have to protect and defend Israel, and like the idea of a ceasefire was so, like at that point, we were just starting to understand how controversial a call for ceasefire was becoming. And then people just kept signing on. And now we're at over 330 rabbis Rabbis for Ceasefire, which I'm extremely proud of. You know, in previous iterations of rabbinic organizing that I've done, I've had about 50 rabbis who are willing to kind of stand together and kind of critiquing Israel. You know, it's so sacrosanct in the Jewish community to, you know, just support Israel, whatever it's doing, right? Yes. And that's kind of, we're often encouraged to do that. And so the fact that we have this many rabbis that in this time of all times are saying our Jewish values lead us to call for ceasefire is really inspiring to me. It's like the one little kernel of hope that I'm like holding on to in this time.
Well, I think that's beautiful. And I think that ties in a lot to why I wanted to have you, because you do live between the crossroads of these two different worlds, you know, and I think we live in a time, especially with anything that is political centered, it's either you're one way or the other. There is no in between. There is no way to have a conversation, to find the middle ground. It's like, if you're on this side, you're on this side. If you're on this side, then you're on that side, and you can't really blend the two, you know? And you talked a little bit about, you know, your affiliation and understanding of what Israel is, and how as a Jewish person that you're taught to just stand on the side of Israel, right? So what has the opposition been like? Because I can imagine that a lot of people felt very strongly about this stance that you were taking.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the truth is that the American Jewish community right now is in a moment of crisis, right? There's a moral crisis, but there's also just a crisis of like, who are we and what are we going to become, right? So things are changing really rapidly. Like the huge protests that we're seeing all the time, you know, popping off all over the country are disproportionately led by Jews, right? That are part of the ceasefire movement. And so I think a lot of the opposition is frankly the same thing I've seen. I've been part of the Palestinian rights movement for over 20 years. And so I'm kind of used to the critiques that get lobbed my way, right? And I've kind of grown a thick skin over the years around that. And I think, you know, part of it is that we are challenging fundamentally an idea of kind of, does support for Israel, is that inseparable from Jewish identity, right? And a lot of American Jews right now are saying, yes, like our Judaism is not reliant upon support for a nation state, right? Because I think Israel acts in the world on behalf of the Jewish people, or they claim to, right? But the reality is that Israel is a nation state, just like any other state, and they have political interests, right? And the US has a special relationship with Israel, also that is reliant on political interests. And from the beginning of the movement to establish Israel, it has been using Jewish culture and Jewish tradition really as like a PR strategy and a fig leaf rather than anything substantive, right? If Israel as a Jewish state was living according to Jewish values, they wouldn't be imposing starvation on 2.3 million people in Gaza. They wouldn't have been enacting decades-long policies of occupation of Palestinian people in an apartheid system. You know, those are not things that are central, right, to Jewish life and Jewish values, you know, and in my reading of it at least.
Interesting. So growing up, because personally, when all of this started to, you know, come to a head, I personally didn't know a lot about Israel, or that it was directly connected to being Jewish. You know, so I think that's when things started to get a little confusing. And I think a lot of us that don't live that experience were living in a place of this is something that I don't really understand. And it feels almost like this is something that is happening so far from us that when I was even doing like research, right? And I also saw how media was so biased that I would watch one thing and then that would give me a whole different information than what this was giving me. And it seemed to be either one-sided. And I think people have also confronted the media about their reports of how they've talked about this situation. My question to you is, growing up, what were you taught about Israel?
Yeah, I was raised in a actually fairly religiously observant house in Cincinnati, Ohio. My family actually immigrated from historic Palestine to Cincinnati. My family moved from Lithuania to Palestine in 1809, and then during World War I, my great-grandfather was drafted by the Turkish army and didn't want to go, the Ottoman army. And so a friend of his offered to help him immigrate to the US and help sell his family's kosher food products in the Midwest out of Cincinnati. So I grew up in a very kind of small, very Zionist, pro-Israel traditional family. And my family has roots, back to 1809 in that land. And our family were some of the first Jewish settlers outside the walls of the old city of Jerusalem. And that was a point of pride for my family growing up. When we would go on family trips to Israel, we would go take pictures under the street sign of my ancestors who were the first Jewish settlers. And I was taken many times to Israel growing up as a child and in my youth group, and I went to college, my junior year of college there, which is actually when my politics shifted. But I was raised to believe that Israel was needed because in the wake of the Nazi Holocaust, the world turned its back on the Jews, and that Jews needed their own state because you couldn't trust anybody else. And that's actually a really terrifying idea, right? Like that's actually really scary. And I think in my life, I've learned that actually building relationships across race, across faith, across identity is actually the thing that's actually gonna allow for safety, right? And I think the Trump years really brought that into focus for us, that like the way that we keep people safe is through solidarity, right? And that actually is an antidote. Like, so instead of the answer to Jewish safety being we need our own state, which requires the dispossession of Palestinian land and the occupation of Palestinian people, and now the mass murder of Palestinian people, there is another option, right? There is another way forward. And so my life has really been about being on that spiritual journey where I kind of took the Jewish values that I was taught in the Jewish day school I went to and in my family and applied them to what I'm seeing happening now, right? And I understand that, this push for support for Israel is kind of a blip in Jewish history, right? Like Judaism is like a centuries old religious and cultural tradition, and Zionism and the state of Israel is just like in that scheme of things is like a very short chapter, right? And so I feel like part of what feels important to me is that we're able to kind of separate out Judaism, this like beautiful religious cultural tradition, which Zionism, which is a political ideology that promotes Jewish supremacy of that land, and that separation is really critical to me.
So you just spoke that at some point your political views changed, right? And did you say college? Is that what you said? What was that change? What was that moment that you were like, oh, something needs to,
So I remember it like, and maybe I've just told this story a bunch of times, but I remember there was a moment where I signed up for Hebrew University in Jerusalem for my junior year. And at that point, I'd been to Israel many times, and I had gone to Jewish day school and Jewish summer camps, and I felt like I knew everything. And there was a protest with a flag talking about occupation. And I was like, what's that? Like, I had never heard of an occupation. I had never heard of Palestinians. Like, when I was brought there growing up, it was like Arabs, right? The word Palestinian wasn't even used in my family growing up. And never did I hear of anything called an occupation. And so it was these Palestinian Israeli students that were mounting this demonstration. This was in 1999, so I'm dating myself. And I'm not a spring chicken. But and so I went up to them and I was like, wait a minute. Like, I was taught a land without a people for a people without a land, right? That's what I was taught growing up, is that there was this empty land, and the Jews needed a land, and we came here. And so basically I started unlearning everything that I had been taught. And actually the most impactful things that I read were actually from the Israeli leaders of the time of the founding of the state, where they said very explicitly, like, they forcibly displaced at gunpoint mass amounts of Palestinians and took their land. Like, they weren't hiding it. But then I felt like my family and my teachers were lying to me, right? And I think that was really, emotionally complicated time, right? Because I had been raised to be a Jewish woman and to support Israel and to support my people. And now these kind of, it felt like a betrayal. But then I came to understand that my parents didn't know either, right? There was a deliberate strategy of like kind of like putting that dirty secret away, right? And of like what it actually required to establish the state of Israel was on the backs of the indigenous Palestinian population, right? That wasn't something that we talked about. Like, and I think I think of it as parallel to the ways in which even like the story of Thanksgiving, like I wasn't told the truth about that. Like that took a while, right? Like, and even the story of like, I mean, the history of slavery in this country is something that we talked about, but like how deeply did we kind of understand what the like generational repercussions are of kind of those policies of intentional dispossession and kind of erasure, right, of different cultural traditions. So that's kind of like what began my journey, right? I would say was that protest that one day, and then the relationships I built. And the learning that I did, and I started to go into the West Bank and meet Palestinians that year. And then I came back to the U.S. and moved to New York City because I knew that there were going to be all kinds of people in New York City, including Jews that were like me. And I was right. There was a group called Jews Against the Occupation that I joined. When I came back to the U.S., the second intifada, the popular uprising, had begun. And so I got to learn from these group of activists that were veterans of the ACT UP movement and of anti-war activism and feminist organizing, right? Who taught me about like the ACT UP people were like, experts in direct action, like street action, right? And all the older generations of women that kind of had fought for their place in institutions of like higher education and power and like the anti-war strategy, the people who had been like going against the grain of their community kind of gave me the courage to keep going, and they kind of encouraged me into becoming a rabbi.
Where is the disconnect here? Especially with people, because, usually when people post about this stuff on social media, or if somebody says free Palestine or something like that, then people are in the comments like, you don't know your history, you aren't understanding, you don't know the depths of this. So I'm trying to understand, where is the disconnect in the teachings that those that are pro-Israel, like, how do they not know how Israel came to be? And if they do know, why are they still trying to defend the actions of Israel? But furthermore, if we're talking about a land that was given to the Jews, because primarily after the Holocaust and all that situation, especially with how the Holocaust affected Jews and what that looked like, how can you then go and do that to another people? Right. You know what I mean? Like that, I'm trying to make that make sense to me.
Yes. Well, there's a lot of questions that you raised in there.
Yes.
So I feel like an important place to start is to understand that the project of founding the State of Israel began way before the Holocaust.
Okay.
So it began in the late 19th century. And in my reading of that history, there's actually a really important piece of it that still to this day is not talked about as much as it should be, which is the influence of Christian Zionism as part of it. So there's like a legacy in Christianity of this idea that there's like different dispensations of Christ. And in the one that we are in now, there's going to be the kind of second coming, at which point everybody must either convert to Christianity or burn, right? And that the settlement of Jews in historic Palestine and the land of Israel is meant to hasten that second coming.
Got it.
And so many people within the British government, who actually were the ones that kind of gave the land to the Jewish people. So the British mandate took
Correct.
over, and then the British kind of tried to separate the land in a partition plan for Jews and Palestinians. The Lord Balfour, who kind of famously wrote the initial document, he himself was a Christian Zionist and was motivated by these ideas of needing to kind of accelerate Jewish immigration in order to hasten the second coming. And again, it's fundamentally an anti-Semitic concept because Jews have to convert or burn at the end of that story, right? So it's kind of a complicated, like strange bedfellow situation, right? And then, you know, part of what happened was, you know, it didn't come to fruition until after the mass murder of Jews and gays and communists and all those that the Nazis murdered as part of the Nazi Holocaust, and the kind of the world's guilt, right, as part of that, and in particular Christian guilt. I think, you know, we're still feeling the reverberations of that. And so I think this goes back to what I was saying before of like, is the answer to that we all need to like isolate ourselves in different countries all over the world? Like, is that really our vision of how we live, right? Like what the future is going to look like? And I feel like in this time, I'm thinking a lot about the future, right? I feel like which is hard because right now we're trying to fight for a ceasefire urgently because people are dying, hundreds of people are dying every single day. So it's hard to get out of the present and think about the future, but I think we have to, of like, what are we trying to leave to future generations? Is it this legacy of we need to kind of just take care of our own?
Right.
Or is it an obligation to build alliances, right? And I think that the past kind of decade in the US, where we've seen the racial uprisings of the Black Lives Matter movement and the kind of solidarity we saw with the Muslim ban of Trump, and the immigration fights and the fight for trans people and LGBTQ equality, like those things have been like very intersectional fights where people who kind of like how I am in this situation ostensibly are the beneficiaries of that, right? Like as a white person, I'm ostensibly to benefit from the suppression of Black people in this country, right? And I, as a Jew, am ostensibly to benefit from, you know, from this Jewish state, but I don't actually feel any safer in the world because of the actions of Israel. And in fact, I think Israel's grotesque violence actually makes Jews less safe in the world. So there's like a contradiction there where people say we need Israel for Jews to be safe. But honestly, the actions of the state of Israel when they claim to be acting on behalf of all Jews make us less safe, you know, because of the egregious violence, it leads people to feel mistrusting of Jews, right? And not wanting to form those alliances, right? So it's like, it is actively gets in the way of being able to build the kind of solidarity that I think that we need. And then, you know, here in the US, we've been doing, you know, the American Jewish community here, I think has been doing a really beautiful job of like insisting of our place in these progressive movements. And, you know, so I think that over time, we're going to see the entire American Jewish community changing because it's not a sustainable place, right? We've been raised on progressive values, and if we're going to stay true to those progressive values, and I think like that's true for myself, but thinking about younger generations, right? Like the college encampments that we've been seeing all across the country, like those are people who are like learning and practicing kind of being in their integrity and kind of understanding, like they're the perfect example of understanding, like if they don't fight now, they are going to inherit that fascist future, right? You know, and so like they actually have the most to lose, right? Because they have their whole lives ahead of them of like, and so people are saying, well, why are they jettisoning their careers by, you know, like, installing these encampments? But it's like, well, what's the point of a career if you're going to be like, if the alternative is a future where there is militarized policing and fascist violence here, like that we've seen, and if we live in a place where our government is spending billions of dollars on funding the military that is conducting mass murder of Palestinians and enforced starvation.
There's been a lot of pressure from society
Yeah.
for people with platforms to speak up,
Yeah.
right? And I remember when we reached out to you, in your response, you were like, now you do know that this is going to make a lot of people angry. They're going to feel, and I remember I told my team, I was like, I'm very well aware. I guess what I'm trying to understand, because, you know, there's a lot of people that felt like celebrities or public figures weren't speaking up about this situation because of a money thing, of feeling like they're going to lose their jobs or they're not going to. I don't, at least for me, I don't think that was my concern.
Yeah.
I think more so it was, because you talked about like Jewish people having this target on their back, right? I think what was alarming for me was if you did say something like ceasefire or free Palestine, then you were labeled as anti-Semitic.
Yes.
And I think that feels very much like if you're calling somebody racism. And I think that was like, hold on, well, I don't want people to think that that's who I am or that's my views. I just don't think that these innocent people should be killed, because I think if you look at the basis of this situation, it's like when you look at pictures of Israel right now versus pictures of Palestine, there is a big difference just visually, even in casualty amounts. You know what I mean? So why do you think people use that as a way to deter people from speaking up? And is it by saying ceasefire, free Palestine, is that anti-Semitic?
That's a good question. I mean, the reason people say it is because it's effective.
Yeah.
Right? And it relates to what I was saying before about the Christian guilt, right? Like there is this kind of, we haven't gotten over the, like the sense of responsibility, which is a good thing. We want people to feel repentant when they make mistakes, right? We're like that. We don't want to like the baby with the bathwater with that kind of sentiment. Like it's right to like learn from history and say we made a mistake, right? Here's the problem. The problem is that Israel has strategic, and its supporters and enablers in the US have had a concerted strategy to equate criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. And it's an industry, right? Like we are being encouraged to think that, right? And it's, the reason that they use it too is not just because it's effective, is because it's actually the only thing that they can say, because it's their policies are so indefensible. You can't actually debate like an apartheid system, and like Gaza, right, which is now currently on bombardment, has been an open air prison for 16 years, right? Like you can't defend policies like that. So instead of actually having to be interrogated, like brought to the mat around what are those policies and are they just, and do they uphold basic tenets of human rights and international law, and do are they something that the US should be supporting? You just kind of cut the conversation at the pass with a cry of anti-Semitism. That being said, you know, it's not inherently anti-Semitic to critique Israel. Israel is a nation state and it must be critiqued, right? Like governments must be critiqued, right? That's baseline. That being said, there are people who might be motivated by anti-Jewish sentiment that they have learned growing up and they've gotten from society that makes them want to, you know, speak out and critique Israel. And I know that because I'm a person who, like, thinks of myself as an anti-racist and wants to be, but I also know I'm a white person who was raised in this country, and I was like subconsciously and consciously trained to like mistrust people of color, you know, and I have to actively interrogate that, right? So I'm not asking anybody to do anything that I'm actually not doing myself. It's like being aware, and I think you're more susceptible to those false accusations of anti-Semitism if you actually haven't done the work to kind of interrogate in yourself of like, wait a minute, like what is motivating me here, right? And because there are legitimate motivations, right? Us as US taxpayers are paying for this war. Just last week they said $1 billion with a B. Like a couple of weeks ago, they passed a $15 billion package of military funding. like as U.S. taxpayers, that's enough of a reason to speak up, right? But I think that you are more susceptible to those arguments if you actually haven't done that interrogation. And I think that part of the issue with the anti-Semitism discourse is that it also leaves everybody off the hook for rampant Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian racism, which is what's motivating the other side of the equation, right? It's like, what is keeping people off the sidelines is like, you know, the post 9/11 anti-Muslim hysteria in this country, we're still in that, right?
Yeah.
Like that culture is still part of us, right? And we've been trained to you know, and I know this is very much to be true for me growing up, of like, to be scared of Arabs, right? Like that was part of growing up in a Zionist culture, was being like thinking of Arabs as enemies, right? And now, like my closest collaborators and colleagues are Palestinians, right? And the people who, you know, when there are anti-Semitic attacks in the US, like as have happened since Trump, right? The violent anti-Semitism from white nationalists and Christian, like that's actually where the anti-Semitism is coming from, right? And then they want to make it seem like it's coming from college students, right? Or from like just like a US taxpayer who's trying to like ensure that our tax dollars aren't going to kill children in Gaza. You know, we're turning our attention away, and like the Palestinians in my life were the first to call me in the wake of the violent anti-Semitism to be like, what do you need? I'm here for you, like living into that value of solidarity. And so I think that, you know, the weaponization of anti-Semitism, you know, as a tool to shut down dissent and debate and critique of Israel has been incredibly effective. And I think the most impactful antidote to it is, on the one hand, as I said, interrogating your own biases, but on the other hand is just being in multi-faith, multiracial movements for justice, where you're linking arms with Jews and Christians and Muslims and just people of conscience across race and identity in order to address the most urgent human rights issues of our time, and kind of be rooted in being able to call out actual anti-Jewish hatred when you see it, but not allow those false accusations to keep you silent, because that silence literally means death for Palestinians in Gaza, like on a daily basis.
This is where we get down to the nitty-gritty of it, because I think how this situation gets conflated is that we aren't having a conversation or a debate about historical context or who owns the land. What this is about, when people are saying ceasefire or free Palestine, we are talking about thousands of people, innocent people, losing their lives. And regardless, across the board, that just shouldn't exist. That should not be a factor, that people are losing their dreams and their aspirations and their livelihoods and all that because just solely based off of who they are. You know what I mean? And I think that's what people are getting so confused. Like every time I see someone post Free Palestine, I look at the comments, right? Everybody's always like, well, what about the hostages? What about the hostages? And it's like, just because you say this does not mean that we don't care about these hostages as well. It's just like, we don't want any of this to exist. You know, we want everybody to feel free and safe, you know, and also feel like they have land that is theirs and not being displaced, you know what I mean? But like, you're intercepting even aid, you know? So let's talk about that, because I know you went to Israel, correct? And were arrested. Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
So there's a policy of intentional starvation of the 2.3 million people in Gaza right now. And at Rabbis for Ceasefire, when we were preparing for the holiday of Passover, right, which we celebrated last month, it's a holiday where we celebrate freedom, right? And so we kind of were heading into it a little bit trepidatious. Like, what does it mean for us to celebrate freedom this year, right? It's a story of liberation, of bondage, of Israelites from Mitzrayim. That's the Hebrew word. I prefer to use that than Egypt because it gets confusing. And so during Passover, you have what's called a Seder. You sit at a table and tell the story of the liberation. And the kind of climax of that Seder is a section where you tell the story. And the first line of that, you say, Kol difkin yitei veyichol, which means, let all who are hungry come and eat. And that's foundational to the celebration of Passover. And we were watching as not only Israel systemically has kind of sealed the borders, right? That has been true for a long time, right? This is not since October 7th. Since 2007, Israel has kind of had Gaza in an open air prison where they control all the borders by land, air, and sea of like what gets in and gets out. But then we also saw right-wing settlers blocking aid trucks, like holding rave parties in front of the aid trucks in order for the humanitarian aid not to get in. And so we knew that the only way we could celebrate Passover this year was to try to go and deliver food. Okay. So we went to the border of Gaza.
Was it hard getting there?
You know,
what is that process in the midst of a war?
Wait, this is what's interesting is that actually in 2017, I tried to lead an interfaith delegation to Israel-Palestine, and I was stopped from boarding the airplane in the U.S. here because of my activism. So I didn't know if I was going to get in. And so,
are you on like a list?
There was like a list.
Wow.
And because of my activism that I wasn't allowed to fly in 2017. So when I tried to fly last month, I wasn't sure what was going to happen.
And the U.S. is in control of this list? Like who
No, the airline had a letter from Israel that had my name and some of the other names of people on the delegation where they said, we're not going to let them in. Don't let them on the plane.
Wow. Okay.
And so I didn't know what was going to happen. So when we flew there this time, I went to the passport control and they clicked and I was on a list and they pulled me aside for extra questioning. And it was like the place where like, it was all the Palestinians trying to come in and me. And so the Palestinians were like, what are you doing? You know, and they were like, what's this white girl doing over here with us? So they interrogated me for a couple hours and ultimately let me in. So that was actually the hardest part of it. We stayed in Tel Aviv overnight, and then that next morning met up with Israeli activists who we had co-organized, Israeli rabbis and Israeli peace activists who helped us co-organize the action and buy the food, and we met up, and it's just a road, you just drive. Like, it's just like a road that we took from Tel Aviv, you know, which was kind of fascinating. It's like, you think of it as like all somewhere totally far away, like how are you gonna get there? But it was like, you just took a road from Tel Aviv and made a couple turns, and we got just to the 1 kilometer from the border, and they stopped us and arrested us. And they actually only arrested the women, which was interesting that we were with.
And what did they arrest you for?
When they so they held me in a jail for 10 hours with a couple other people. When they interrogated me, they told me they were arresting me for trying to bring food to the people of Gaza. They said it twice. And I was like, you know what? I need the transcript of this interrogation because you're literally saying, like, they were like, you tried to bring rice and flour to the people of Gaza. And
Is that illegal?
It is illegal. That was the crime. And after we did the formal interrogation, the interrogator turned off the recording device and she was like, I just want to talk to you, you and me. And she was like, as a Jewish woman to a Jewish woman, like, why on earth would you do this? She was like, there's no starvation. And even if there was, there's nobody to feed. There's no innocent people in Gaza. And she went on to tell me, sitting there with a picture of her and her toddler on her desk, babies aren't innocent. Fetuses in the womb aren't innocent. There's nobody innocent in Gaza. And this genocidal thinking, I heard everywhere. Like from a taxi driver, it was like, I was in the country a very short amount of time, but the kind of like daily genocidal ideology, like the dehumanization of Palestinians inside of Israeli society is complete, which makes sense. That's the only way that you can like go along with what's happening. Like, you know, people who right now are kind of rationalizing what Israel's doing is because they don't see Palestinians as human. Not the babies, not the children, she said to me, fetuses in the womb. And, you know, it was like, that was the worst part of the whole experience, was just having to sit across from this woman, right? And her saying to me, kind of, she was angry with me, you know, like, and when she like let me go, she was like, I hope you never come back here ever again, you know, and it's just like we're living in different worlds, right? And it comes back to the thing I was saying at the beginning about the core Jewish value of understanding that all people are made in B'Tselem Elohim is what it says in the Torah, in the image of the divine, right? And are we going to be a people that lives up to that value, right? And when I was sitting across from her, I understood, like, that's not what she's doing, right? Like, and she's, as an Israeli police officer, right, as a defender of the state of Israel, she is willing to give up the dignity and the lives of other human beings, right? So it was a sobering experience, to say the least. And since then, last week, we saw right-wing settlers like going on board to these trucks and throwing the aid off of the trucks and destroying it, and the police and the military just watching. And within like 20 minutes, I mean, immediately they surrounded and detained us trying to bring the aid in, right? So we're seeing like what the actual values are, right? And so when you talk about like what is like people not having enough information, like you don't need a lot of information. You don't, like the history is, it's not to say that history isn't important. It is, there's important things to discuss, especially when it comes to issues like repatriation and reparations, right? There is repair that needs to be done historically on all kinds of issues. But right now, all you need to do is look around and say, are these my values, right? Is it my values that 37,000 people should be killed? That 2.3 million Palestinians should be denied not just food, medical care, education, clean water, right? There's no fuel, like there's no medical system. All the hospitals have been destroyed. Like Israel is just kind of pulverizing the entire Gaza Strip. And now everybody that they've pushed to the south in Rafah, there's 1.3 million people that have been sheltering there. Now they are attacking Rafah. And Biden has said that that was going to be his red line, right? And now we're seeing Israel just like coasting over that red line with no repercussions, right? Another $1 billion being sent last week. And they stopped, there was a lot of hay about one shipment, but they stopped one shipment of bombs that were 2,000-pound bombs, which should not be used in in general, but in residential areas. And that's what they've been using. That's why the numbers of casualties are so huge. You drop a 2,000-pound bomb is in a residential neighborhood and the whole neighborhood is gone, right? So they stopped a certain shipment of those huge bombs, but other weapons are still flowing freely. And now you have 600,000 people in Rafah fleeing for their lives with nowhere to go. The Biden administration has said that part of the red line was there would need to be a credible evacuation plan for those people in Rafah, and there is none. There's nowhere safe for them to go. The ground invasion has begun, right? And so it's just all horror on top of a horror, right? You've seen entire bloodlines in Gaza be eliminated, like entire family lines, right? And it's painful. And you raised before the issue of like, how is it that a people that survived a genocide enact a genocide, right? And I think that, one of the things is that I've learned from kind of people who theorize about trauma is that people who experience trauma are actually more likely to repeat it, not less.
Hurt people. Yeah. There's a lot of debate around the term genocide, but just off of you telling me about the experience of what that officer said to you. Yeah. If the issue is that you have a problem with Hamas, but you're not targeting Hamas. You are targeting everyone. If you can just create a statement that no Palestinian is innocent, that's insane to me. Right. That's no longer a war.
Right. Well, it's a certain logic that you kind of have to indulge in, right? It's like an indulgence, right? Like you have to like give yourself permission to dehumanize an entire people, to rationalize, right? It's from a place of trauma and from a place of fear. But you can understand that without making that be an excuse, right? And it's like that kind of logic where everybody's a target, right? Is terrifying, right? And like, where is the end of that logic, right? And it's like, we all know that if you allow one people to be dehumanized that way, it allows other people to be humanized down the road, right? Like, so, that's classic of like, if they come for me now, they'll come for you later, right? And I think that speaks to the student movement. I feel like when I visited the encampments over the past the past month or weeks, like that felt really palpable, that they like understood that very viscerally of like, if we let this go unchallenged, it's just gonna, we need to like nip it in the bud, like you like take a weed by its roots, right? Like you can't let this kind of hatred and vengeance, right, go unchecked, because it's just gonna like reap more in the future.
Right. Do you feel that there is any potential for any light at the end of this tunnel?
I feel like it feels like it's my spiritual and moral obligation to find hope, right? That feels like, given my own positionality in this issue, like it's not up to me to give up. And I see Palestinians being so steadfastly resilient in the face of decades of occupation. Like when I was just in Israel last month, I went for an afternoon to the West Bank into Palestinian communities, and just the like immense hospitality, just like the coffee, the tea, the food, the like every, the how gracious of a society that there is. Like just compare, I was like, whenever I go anywhere, people aren't like I stop by somebody's house, they're not like, let me give you like tea service, coffee service right away. Like we went on a little walk to see the settlement expansion, and they brought the tea service with us into the hills, like on a hike.
Oh, wow.
You know what I mean? Like just a level of, and so I just am so inspired by that steadfastness. So I feel like,
even in the midst
of it all. And I think that like the relationships, like even this conversation that we're having and the connection that we're making, and that people who listen and engage in this conversation, like there's, transformation doesn't always happen in an instant, right?
Correct.
And I think there's enough of us that understand what's at stake here, that we are not gonna stop. We're not gonna be silent. There's enough of us that are willing to kind of continue to put our bodies in the street and kind of raise our voices and refuse this. Okay. So I feel like that's the hope. And my 330 some rabbis that are kind of insisting on a different Jewish future, and one that is moral and ethical at its core, it's powerful.
That's beautiful. Well, for those that, everybody don't have the range to be on the front line.
Yeah.
What are ways that people can be involved, that they can help the cause, even if they don't want to be out into the streets?
Yeah, I feel like the most important thing is, like I said, engaging with your members of Congress. Like there's money, the weapons that are flowing right now to Israel need to stop now until the ceasefire, like a permanent ceasefire, needs to stop. Correct. Like the weapons need to stop. And so calling your members of Congress and letting them know that that matters to you is the most important thing. I think staying in touch. I know we're on social media, and that's a way a lot of us get information, and following accounts on the ground in Gaza and in the West Bank, and hearing from Palestinians directly is really important, in order that we can kind of signal boost those voices, because the mainstream media isn't covering this as they should. So being able to kind of get it from the people directly on the ground. And I think following organizations that are doing work and staying engaged. And then I think like in the little ways that you can just post, resharing this interview, and resharing kind of the way that you, like if you see something that catches your eye and moves you, like share it. It takes courage right now to share things like that, because of what we were talking about the cancel culture that we live in. But you don't need to like kind of risk arrest by stopping traffic. You could just raise your voice in the little ways, and like having conversations in your community, like even those little moments of kind of resistance to the culture of silence and fear around speaking out of this are like they build, right? And they really matter.
That's great. I have one last question.
Yeah.
How are you taking care of yourself? And also,
that's a very nice question. Thank you for asking that.
Well, because the difficulty is, like this show, you live in the crossroads, right? So you're getting almost like double it. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I know that that's a heavy load to carry.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to take a moment to check in on you because
Thank
you
you.
are doing this daily, and I know that it's heavy.
It's such a good question. It's not my strong suit. I mean, I love pleasure and I love fun and I love joy. I mean, organizing is how I take care of myself. Like it's really true that like continuing like saying yes when anybody wants to have a conversation with me, and that's like that actually keeps me sane. But then I feel like the other piece of it is just like meals with the people that I love, like having a moment to kick back and like enjoy. And, like the thing that has kept me my whole life is my Shabbat practice. Like, so every Shabbat I turn off my phone, I don't spend money, I don't drive my car, I like am quiet for 25 hours every week. And I don't think I've made it this far in my career without that practice.
That's great. Well, just know that if there's anything I can do to support you,
Thank you. I
have
really
a friend in me.
appreciate that. Thank you.
And I thank you
Likewise.
for your work. Thank you. I really appreciate the work that you're doing. I really appreciate you being here. I think you have definitely, even beyond the research that I had already done, really opened my eyes, and I really hope that the people watching this are able to get a different point of view and are able to see things a lot clearer than what has been presented to us on many different occasions and from various media sources. So
I
thank you
appreciate
for being
you
here.
opening up this space. It is courageous. Like it really is in this environment that we live in now. I don't take it for granted. It's really commendable that you kind of made the effort to have this conversation and are taking the risk, and it's a show of solidarity that I think is going to be felt. So thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Once more, I would like to thank Rabbi Wise for her invaluable insights today. Her dedication to fostering understanding and peace between Israel and Palestine is truly inspiring. Today, we've delved deep, uncovering layers that challenge simple narratives. But this isn't the only region in our world where conflict demands our attention and compassion. From the streets of Yemen under siege to the shattered homes in Syria, from the tense borders of Ukraine to the dire humanitarian crisis in the Congo and Haiti, our world is filled with stories of strife and struggle. These stories, like the one we discussed today, require us not only to witness, but also to act. And as we wrap up this episode of Between Crossroads, I urge you all to keep the spirit of inquiry and empathy alive. Let's broaden our gaze beyond the headlines and support those who are making a difference on the ground, including aid workers, journalists, and organizations. Whether it's through educating ourselves, engaging in dialogue, or contributing to humanitarian efforts, every action counts. Thank you for joining us and taking the step to understand more about one of the most enduring conflicts of our time. Let this knowledge empower you to be a part of the global movement towards peace and justice. Stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged. Until we meet again at the next crossroads, take care and keep making a difference. This is Kalen saying goodbye for now.